always done that well.
How have you most improved yourself, do you think, as you've got older?
I get better and better at listening, you know, and I'm better and better at finding my way forward with the words that I choose. And that's just, it's just a continual, in some sense, incremental expansion. I probably got better, too, at seeking out corrective information. So, for example, I got banned from Twitter recently for making a statement that I don't regret, by the way. But I had a friend of mine, two friends of mine, grill me, and I put that on YouTube. It's called Mean Tweets. It was an hour and a half, I said. And one of them, both of them are very, very smart people. One of them's more liberal than I am, I would say, but a very good advocate for that liberal position. And I said, well, let's hash this out. There's some things I've said that have made people angry, and you think I made them unnecessarily angry, and that I was unnecessarily harsh in my tone.
Did they change your mind?
They changed my approach. You know, because one of the things I decided was that I would try to be equally judicious in my words, but that I would use a calmer and more measured tone. And I don't mean use instrumentally. I mean that I would attempt to make the effort to take as much unnecessary emotion out of the statement as possible. And so I started to do that in some of my more recent videos. I mean, I tried to do that before. I think part of the reason that my interview with Cathy Newman went well was because I kept my head. Yeah. And I didn't get irritated. I had a
I mean, she's a good friend of mine, and I watched it with great interest because I felt like you were slightly on parallel lines. And that maybe she would do that interview differently if she had her time again, actually.
I think that's highly possible. Yeah. So yes, I changed my approach quite dramatically. And what happened was that I read a Telegraph article I recently published about Deloitte, and it was a very cutting article. And I was really worried about publishing it because I think it was the most cutting article I've ever written. And I read it on YouTube very, very calmly and carefully. And what happened was the response was much more positive and much less negative. So there was no downside to it. So people didn't say, some people said, I think that I liked your tone when you were more aggressive, especially on issues like this. But by and large, it worked even better because I could be careful in what I was discriminating. And then to ally that with calmness actually made it more potent rather than less. And so that was very interesting. And I mean, we had a very serious discussion about this, my friends and I. I had a lot of people with me in Miami when this was happening, across the political spectrum. We had a very healthy debate for a couple of hours about whether or not I had gone beyond some reasonable limit in the way I was conducting myself, say, on YouTube and Twitter. And some people were very strongly advocating for more of what I was doing and even harsher. And others were saying, well, you're alienating people that you could otherwise communicate with unnecessarily.
See, it's interesting about the listening. Like one of my sons, two of my sons have come today because they just wanted to listen to this. Very unusual. One of them's not even been to the studio before. So he just said to me, I said, give me some advice. You know, you love Jordan Peterson. What's the advice for the interview? He said, just listen more than you normally do. So I've tried hard to ask a question and let you answer.
Right.
And so I'm work in progress. And I've been interviewing people for 35 years. But I do think the listening, as I've got older, I felt the same thing. That
it's a real skill, man.
Listening is a powerful tool, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is nothing that people like more and need more than to be listened to. You know, and that's partly why the left clamors all the time. You know, it says, look, there's all these people who aren't being listened to. It's like, there are a lot of people who aren't being listened to. They're absolutely right. There's no doubt about that. And I've dealt with people who were extraordinarily marginalized, so to speak, in my clinical practice. And some of those people, to straighten out their minds, they need like 10,000 hours of listening. Because no one, and I mean this literally, I've had people in my clinical practice, no one ever listened to them their whole life. And so when they start talking, they're all over the place, they're disorganized, they're hyper-emotional.
Having met me now for an hour, what would your initial clinical diagnosis be?
Well, you're probably optimally disagreeable for your profession, you know, because you can listen, but you're also not a pushover. And that's a very fine line, right? Because if you're too assertive or aggressive, then you get domineering. But if you're not enough, then you're a pushover. And to be, and this was also the case with Cathy Newman, she's quite disagreeable. And that's a masculine trait, by the way. And it was one of the things
I think she'd gone into it, in a way, so how we started the interview. She'd gone into it, I think, with a preconceived idea of what you would be like and sort of stuck to that. Yeah. She's actually a very skillful journalist and interviewer. And I was surprised the way that interview went when I was watching it. And I think it was because she just had an idea of what she thought you would be.
Well, I think she also had an idea of what the optimal outcome of the interview might be. And I think a lot of the journalists who've gone after me in some sense have that. They think, there's part of them that thinks, I'll be the person that finally exposes him for what he is. Yeah. But then they find out that I'm not who they thought that I am. Or at least I'm not quite as demonic as they thought I might be.